everybody. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us. Oh, there you go. My name is Becca Warwick, and I'm an intern for the Montana World Affairs Council, and we are excited to have you all with us this morning. Before I introduce our guest, I would like to thank the Council and the classroom sponsors, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, BNSF Railway Foundation for Security Bank, and Trail West Bank. Ambassador Mark Johnson is Vice Chair of the U.S. Center for Citizen Diplomacy and former National Vice Chair of the World Affairs Council of America in Washington, D.C. He has served as a Mansfield Adjunct Professor at the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center of the University of Montana in 2000, founded the Montana World Affairs Council. Ambassador Johnson retired from the U.S. State Department after serving 30 years in a variety of foreign policy positions. He was the United States Ambassador to Senegal from 1993 to 1996. At the time of his retirement, he was Deputy Inspector General of the State Department. So I will now turn it over to Ambassador Johnson.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
On a trip.
Yeah, no tripping.
Well, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing? Sealy Lake, good?
Good.
All right, good to hear that. And up in Alaska, I've been to Alaska, been to Anchorage, I've given talks up there, I've even ridden on a dog sled, and I survived, so here I am. It's really great to be with you. Thank you for joining us. My thanks, first of all, to our friends at Inspired Classrooms who helped organize this. They do a terrific job. And of course, the organization that I started, the World Affairs Council of Montana. This is a big part of our mission, working with high school students and talking to them about global affairs and why it's important. I'd like to talk to you about why you should be engaged with the world, and why you should think about careers in international affairs. It's very important. And then I'll tell you a little bit about my path, how I left Great Falls, Montana, went to Washington, joined the State Department, spent 30 years as a diplomat, a foreign service officer in places in Africa and the Middle East and in Washington, D.C. And then I had the honor of becoming the United States ambassador. And then, most important part, we'll have a discussion with all of you. So, to begin with, you no doubt have been told by your family, your friends, your parents, your teachers, people like me, that, it's important that you understand global affairs. It's important that you understand the world around you, right? You get that? You've heard that. Well, I have news for you. It's not important. It's more. It's a duty. It's essential. Your generation, unlike my generation, has no choice. You have to engage. My generation, I'm a baby boomer. Some of us engaged, but a lot of us didn't. And by the way, the ones that didn't engage actually went on to write and produce the best music in the history of civilization, but that's another story. So, when I say you have no choice, it's because of the world you live in, the connected world. It's astonishing. It's amazing. 25 years ago, there were only 40 websites in the world. Can you believe that? Today there's, I don't know, 1 billion, plus or minus, something like that. I just heard an astonishing statistic. Every 30 seconds on the internet, more data is created and transmitted than all the data in the world's largest library, the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. So think about that. Every 30 seconds, that's going on. You can't help but be connected to that. And what that means in your world is now, if something can get done, it will get done. If Facebook can get done, it will get done. If WhatsApp can be done, Google, it can be done. And the question for you will be, will it be done by you or to you? And that's the choice that you have to make. So being part of this world, the thing that I would like to encourage you to do, and it's my message, is to seek out ways in which you can engage with the world around you. There are all kinds of opportunities. You could be a volunteer, maybe a little bit later. Maybe 1 million Americans today are out working around the world as volunteers. The Peace Corps, you've heard of that. Doctors, nurses doing humanitarian and relief work. Teachers teaching English in places like China and Japan. Very satisfying, very, very rewarding. If you serve in the military, you will be doing your part. Even missionaries. We have about 250,000 religious organizations, right? And they send people out into the countryside. So there's a big, big area for opportunities. Now, in your high schools in Alaska and in Montana and Seeley Lake, you have some options too. You could study abroad as a high school student. There are programs to do that. Spend a semester abroad, right? You could do a homestay with a family in a foreign country. Go to France, go to Germany, go to Indonesia, go to Senegal, and learn a language. Take an intensive course. It's very rewarding and very, very satisfying. And when you do that, when you go abroad, two things I think will happen. One is you'll see your country in a different way, a different angle, a different perspective. And when you come back, you will be a much better citizen. And the other thing you'll learn about is yourself. You'll come away with that experience with much more confidence and much more aware of what's going on. And hopefully you want to stay connected to that and engage in that. So all of that is I think, very important. I encourage you to do that. Another thing you can do in your high schools is you can have a foreign exchange student. That's a very useful way to learn about another country. I don't know if Seeley Lake has done that, or in Alaska if you've done that up there. But I would encourage you to think about it. I'll tell you a little story about that. When I was ambassador to Senegal, right, in West Africa, the new ambassador of Japan came. He and his wife paid a courtesy call on me and my wife. And his wife was very eager to ask me a question. And she came up to me and she said, "You know Havre?" Havre. I thought I heard her right. Havre, like Havre, Montana? Home of the Blue Ponies and all that? She had been an exchange student there many years ago, but it had left an indelible mark. She remembered the friendship, the hospitality, the warmth, and that's what it's all about. People are people. They want basically the same things. We need to get to know them. You know, everybody's heard of Martin Luther King, right? I Have a Dream speech, very famous. Before that speech, he said something that I've carried with me throughout my career and now in my life. He asked a question. Why do people hate each other? Why do they hate each other? They hate each other because, he said, they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to communicate because they can't talk. So that's why it's important to talk and also to listen. Hear what the other guy has to say. So that's my message to you. Think about a career. Think about being engaged. Your schools have many opportunities, and at the World Affairs Council we'll be happy to give you any kind of advice. Now, I'll tell you about myself. I grew up in Great Falls, all right? When I was 17, 18, I had one overriding career objective. Anybody guess what it was? You may have had some of that yourself. I wanted to put as much distance between me and Montana, all right? And I went to school in Washington, D.C. I probably would have gone to Maine, but I couldn't find it on a map at the time. So I went to school in Washington, D.C. I wanted to get engaged in international service. The heroes of my generation were John F. Kennedy. You know, ask not what your country can do, but rather what you can do for your country. And for me particularly, being a Montana guy, Mike Mansfield. And it was his career in public service that was an inspiration to me. So I joined the Foreign Service as a diplomat, and I was sent abroad. Now, diplomats represent the United States abroad. They promote, protect, The interests of the United States could be in economics, could be in politics, it could be in education, setting up scholarships for foreign students to come to the United States and study in our universities and for high schools. Consular officers take care of American citizens overseas. If you're traveling abroad and you lose your passport, right? You have to go to a consulate or an embassy to have that replaced. Here's a little tip. If you travel abroad with a passport, always make a color copy of it. Keep it separate from your passport. If you lose it, I hope you don't, but if you do, having that copy will make life a lot easier. A little story that happened to my wife and I just this morning. One of our good friends was traveling in Italy. She got very sick. She was in the hospital. She needed to have a medical evacuation. She was having trouble with the insurance company. They called the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. Embassy called the insurance company, and now a nurse is on the way to take care of her. That's what foreign service people do. It's a very satisfying, very rewarding career. When I left Montana to go back east, I'd never been out of the United States, right? I didn't have a lot of experience. I spoke little bit of some foreign language. Nobody could tell what it was when I spoke it, but I thought it was a foreign language anyway. And first place I went to was Kuwait in the Persian Gulf. Traditional Arab monarchy, and I was in charge of commercial affairs, selling U.S. goods and products. Very important for our businesses back home and for jobs. That was one of the richest countries in the world, and from there I went to one of the poorest countries in the world, a place then called Upper Volta, today Burkina Faso. I landed in the middle of a terrible drought, a horrible famine. There was starvation, people were suffering, dying, and my job was to help arrange the shipment of food to the countryside. I served a lot in the Middle East, in Egypt, in Cairo. I helped to try and promote peace between the peoples of Palestine and the peoples of Israel. I went back to Kuwait during Desert Storm to reopen the U.S. Embassy and to restore our relations. And when I was in Washington, D.C., I was part of the team that helped negotiate the release of the U.S. hostages. So as you can see, there's a lot of variety and a lot of different kind of jobs. I always like to joke that if you have a short attention span, this is a great job for you. Well, how did I become an ambassador? How does that happen? What happens is it's a little like the military, if you think of them. You start at the bottom as a junior officer. You work your way up slowly through promotions. You gain experience. You get expertise, and so when a position is opened up for an embassy overseas, your name is put forward. Now, ambassadors are the representative of the president. We have 192 countries. The president obviously can't be in every country, and the ambassador, he or she, represents the president and the interest of the United States in that country. I had the good fortune of going to Senegal, a very progressive country in West Africa, a very peaceful, stable country. I've only known democratic elections, was one of the few countries to get a hold of the scourge of HIV/AIDS back in the 90s. So it was quite an honor to serve there. And diplomats or ambassadors serve at the pleasure of the president, which means at the same time I go out to the post, I also have an undated letter of resignation. So the president has the authority to fire me, in effect, if he doesn't like the job I'm doing. I was nominated by President George Herbert Walker Bush Sr., as an ambassador. Funny thing happened, he was defeated in an election in October, and a new president came in named Bill Clinton. So I had to be nominated all over again and start the process. Fortunately, I had known Bill Clinton since he was 18. He and I were classmates at a university, Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. So I was renominated, and then all ambassadors have to be approved by the U.S. Senate. So I had to go before a congressional committee and testify and prove that I was suitable for this job. So that was also an interesting experience. So what I'm telling you is that these are things that you could aspire to do. I always say to people, if I can do it, you can do it. I also say to people, and this is true in Montana, and I think it's true for you folks in Alaska, people from Montana and people from Alaska are qualified. They can hold their own. I've had 4 or 5 students from the University of Montana who have served in the Foreign Service, and they're doing well. So don't ever think, well, gosh, I'm way out here in the middle of nowhere. I probably won't be good enough for that. That's not true. If you want to do it, go for it. If you think you can, you will. But if you think you can't, you're probably right. So go for it. That's my story. And I look forward now to your questions. Let me just conclude by saying this. The World Affairs Council is very interested in working with our high school students on global issues. If we can be of any help to your teachers, to you, we'd be happy to do so. If you need someone to come and speak, we'd be happy to do that. I've been to Alaska. I'll come up there, but I don't want to ride a dog sled, okay? So, thank you very much. And if there's any questions or any discussion, anything I haven't been clear about, I'll be happy to try and answer it.
Excellent. Let's start with Sealy Lake today. I see some hands in Sealy Lake.
Yes, I don't know if you can tell who I'm pointing at, but just go ahead. The young lady in glasses and the white.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. How many foreign countries have you been to?
About 70. You know, it's interesting. People say, what's your favorite country? And that's a kind of a hard question to answer. But people, I'll tell you something. Which countries look the most like Montana? That's for me a better question. There are 2. One is in East Africa, in Kenya, the highlands. That looks a lot like the area around Augusta in central Montana. That's one. And then there are places like in Nepal and places like that that have the mountains that very much looks like Mongolia. Is an interesting country because it has the plains just like Montana. So probably my favorite country was Indonesia because it was so beautiful. My favorite country to work in was Senegal and Egypt. Egypt is a fascinating country with the mummies and the pharaohs and the pyramids and all that. Now, young man beside you had his hand up. Yes, please, good morning.
Do you think that Israel and Palestine will ever achieve peace with each other?
If I understood that correctly, the question was about Palestine being at peace
With Israel.
with Israel.
Mm-hmm. What is your opinion on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's a hard question, but it's an important question. And I'm afraid my answer is not very encouraging. I started this when I was in Egypt. It was in the early 1990s. We had a brief period of hope that the Palestinians and the Israelis would come together and create a peace effort. And it worked almost, but it didn't quite do the job. Now, Israel and Egypt have a peace agreement. That's working. Israel and Jordan. But with the Palestinians, it hasn't worked. And I think 2 problems. One is leadership on both sides, both the Palestinians and the Israelis. You have to have a desire and a will to have peace. And it's tough. It is really tough. Secondly, the Israelis, I think, would like to negotiate forever without an agreement. The Palestinians would like an agreement immediately, but they don't want to negotiate. So maybe in your lifetime you'll see some breakthrough. But for the moment right now, I can't be that optimistic. But I will tell you, if you went to Israel, you went to Palestine, you met the people, you would find them to be very, very wonderful people.
Good questions. Let's see. Is there... We can only see a few... Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
I see a hand up in Alaska. Yes. The green.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go for it.
Hi, my name is Chris, and you say that you've gone around Africa a lot, and we have
Yeah.
a connection with a school in Ghana, Africa. Have you ever
Yeah.
been to Ghana?
I have been to Ghana many times. Yeah. Yeah, it couldn't be more different from the landscape you have in Ghana. It's on the Atlantic Ocean, and it's a bit hot and humid. I think the Ghanaian people are some of the most wonderful people I've ever met, and they are very eager to learn about the United States. So your ability to communicate with them, I encourage you to do that because they welcome it, and you should learn about Ghana because it is a very interesting, progressive country that's trying to create a better life for all of its citizens. So that's a very good question.
Where in Ghana is the school? Oh, lost him
We lost
briefly.
him.
Oh, okay. We'll go back to Sealy, and then we'll
Yeah.
continue that conversation.
Somebody may have a hand up, but I don't think I can see all the hands.
Oh.
So.
There we
There's
go.
Alaska.
We lost you for a second. We were just curious. Where is the school?
Where's what city in Ghana?
Coast City, Ghana.
Coast City.
It's,
Coast City, Accra? Is it Accra?
Yeah. Right near Accra. It's probably about
Okay.
20, 30 miles. It's right there. It's
Yeah.
where the big slave castle, the museum is in Coast City. That's one of their
Yeah.
attractions they always talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys for doing that. Ghana and Senegal both were, it's a sad part of history, but both of them were centers for the slave trades, for the Africans that came to the United States. And you see the legacy of that when you look, for example, some of our professional athletes. I can tell from my own experience that they had ancestors, relatives who lived in Africa. They just have the look about them. They've been many generations here. But it's a legacy that is well installed in Ghana and in places like Senegal. And it's a sad, sad chapter when you go to the slave houses and you look out the door where the ships would pull up to the door. And the doors would open and the slaves would get onto the ship. They would sail away. And they would never, ever, ever return. It's a very sad chapter. Well, that's a great question. Thank you. Yes, sir. The blue in the front in Sealy.
How many languages do you know since you've gone to over 70 countries?
That's a good question. It depends. When I'm traveling to certain countries, I will do cram, so I can speak French, I can speak Indonesian, I could speak Arabic, and probably I could speak a little Farsi, which is the language of Iran. And one of the things that's important, one of the things that stimulates your ability to communicate with other people is obviously to learn the language. They learn English, and we should make a bigger effort to learn their languages. And you'll find it's very satisfying if you do that. It's very, very interesting and rewarding to be able to have a conversation with your friends in a foreign country. So that's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see several hands in Alaska.
Alaska, I can't see. You're dark on the far,
like
my right to the far left.
A Nike shirt.
Nike shirt, that's the one I was thinking about.
Hi, my name is Xander, and did any of the, like, in the countries you went to, you said you've been over 70 countries, did any of, like, the states of the country surprise you? Like, the, buildings or, like, the look of them?
Well, I think that's a good question. Actually, it's mixed. In some places, here's what I think happens to a lot of people. I think as Americans, be we in Alaska or Montana, doesn't matter. But we're not used to the kind of suffering and hardships that family have. I think that's number one. The difficulties they have economically. Now, both of you are in nice classrooms, right? You've got desks, you've got heat, you've got light. Now, take all that away. Imagine that you're in an African classroom and all of you have one pencil. See what I'm saying? And here's the good news, though. They persevere. They work hard. They want to learn. Education is a universal language. and they do their best with what they've got. And so that part is very inspiring. Yes, the hardship and the economic poverty is very, very difficult. I suppose the other thing is in Cairo. Cairo is the biggest city in Africa, the biggest city in the Middle East. I will say today it's about 25 million people. It has the worst traffic in the world. And in Cairo, there are 3 rules when you drive. Number 1, you throw away your rear view mirrors. Some of you are driving, you don't need your rear view mirrors. That's history, that's behind you. Only worry about the car in front of you. If you see a space between 2 cars, you have to fill it or someone else will. And you have to use your horn all the time. Because if you don't use your horn, people think you're sneaky and you're trying to pull something off. So, but overall, overwhelmingly, my impressions are positive. It's the people. It's all about the people. And the people want what you in Alaska and you in Montana, us in Montana, have and take for granted. They want opportunity, they want dignity, and they want freedom. Very good question. What does that say? Loyola, Toyota?
Oh, I think it's a Loyola shirt? No, yeah, Joyful. It's the Joyful shirt.
Great. Go for it. I'm sorry I don't know your names. This is pretty rude to call you by the name of your T-shirt. Please.
What is your favorite part about your job, and what is your least favorite part about your job?
Good question.
Well, the good part of my job right now is that I'm retired, so I don't have to worry about that. But that's a good question. I like the part about being able to help people. I like the part when we had this massive, massive starvation in Africa. Our ability to bring in food in airplanes, literally, and get it out to the countryside. We saved lives, and that's something very, very special. What I didn't like sometimes the health issue. Sometimes it was not the healthiest place. I didn't like sometimes dealing with the bureaucracy and the red tape that everybody has to go through when they work for the government. But those were minor concerns, because ultimately you could change lives. All right, that's why these careers are both important and satisfying. You can change lives. You can do things. So I again encourage you to think about that. Yes, in the red.
The hardest part about your job?
What was the hardest part of my job? Well, the hardest part, I think, for example, in Cairo, was realizing that we had a security problem. This was before terrorism was really discovered, but we still had bad issues. And as an ambassador, you represent the president. You are responsible for the people underneath you, and so I took that with a great deal of concern, and so it was something that weighed on me very heavily. Now, fortunately, I had very good people working with me and for me. So as a team, and I think that's an important word, teamwork, we were able to take care of it. I didn't like bad weather. I don't know what the temperature today in Alaska. What's the temperature in Alaska today? 20s, 30s? I'll just say it's cold. Montana, I know what your temperature is like, because it's pretty similar to what we're having up here. You ever been in temperature of 120 degrees?
I've been close to. That's hot.
Been in the desert? Yeah. So dealing with different climates is very hard. The heat, dust, that kind of thing. But you're there to do a job, and I think if you're motivated and you're focused, you can get by with that. You can survive through that.
Mm-hmm.
Do I see a hand?
Yeah, Alaska's got some questions.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. The green.
Hello, my name is Ian, and you were talking about that you've been to a lot of places, and I was wondering, what was your most favorite place and why? You did?
Well, I tell you, the country that I like the best, although I didn't like it at the time, was Egypt. Egypt is so fascinating with the pharaohs, with King Tut, with all the monuments. The problem was I never had time to enjoy any of that. But it is such a rich, rich society that they have. I enjoyed being in Senegal as the ambassador, working with a countries who saw things very similar to the way the United States saw them, a country that was working very hard to improve the lives of its citizens, a country that had only, and this is very unique in Africa, that only had democratic elections. And I was very proud for them because they did it, but we encouraged them to do it. So that part was good. Indonesia is a country of about 16,000 islands in Southeast Asia. It's spectacularly beautiful. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed it almost as if I were a tourist, but unfortunately I had to work. So, so I did. There really was no assignment, even in a poor country, a very, very poor country where people live on $1 or $2 a day, as it was the case in what we called Upper Volta. The thing that was inspiring, really inspirational, was the people. To see how the people work together in villages, how they solve their problems, how these students in a classroom with one pencil, maybe 1 or 2 books, manage to get for themselves an education. That, I think, is something I'll never forget.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
I was curious, did your family travel with you
Yes.
on these assignments, and what was that like for your family?
My family did travel with me. We had a young son, so immediately we had problems with him, with his schooling. In Africa, when we started, there was no English-speaking school. Now imagine, you take this for granted, so imagine you were plunged into another school tomorrow where no one spoke English. He had to learn French. Now, the good news is he learned French, and in fact, when he spoke French, much better accent than his father's, he convinced people that he was French because he just picked it up and repeated it. Unfortunately, when he got back to the United States, he lost most of it, although now he's interested. He's doing international things, so he's interested in that. I think the big problem also is health. Again, I'll tell a story about my son. He fell. I think he was about 11, 12. He fell, had a very, very bad break in his arm, shattered his elbow, and the medical facilities were not adequate, and so we had to fly him to the nearest place that had a decent hospital, which in this case was Singapore, and then he came back home. I've known stories of families where other diplomats have had children die from some disease. I think, though, on balance, for families that go abroad, it's an incredible, incredible experience. For my wife, back in those days, the wives did not work. Now they have opportunities for jobs, and so they can have a very satisfying career on their own. So it's gotten a lot better, I would say, since, maybe 40 years ago. It took us a while, but I think now we're able to support families in the manner that they should be supported.
I see a hand in Alaska.
Alaska.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, please.
You said you used to be classmates with Bill Clinton. What were your original thoughts when he was elected?
Well, I was very proud. Look, what I say about Bill Clinton and myself, and I suppose I'm being putting the two of us together in a way that's bragging, and I don't mean to do that. But here's the story. I told you I was 18. I wanted to get away from Montana. So there was another 18-year-old guy, right? He had this idea. Believe it. He said he wanted to be president of the United States. So what do you say? We say, like, oh, that's interesting. I'll get out. Okay? And another guy said, I want to join the Foreign Service and become an ambassador. Well, that was Bill and Mark, and we both achieved our dreams. That's my point. Now it can happen. You know, if you want it to happen, it will happen. Facebook, it happened. Google, it happened. WhatsApp, it happened. These things can happen, and like I said, it will either be done by you or to you. And you have the ability. You know, your world is a little like bungee jumping, right? It's kind of scary. It's very fast. It's irreversible. But at the end, it's exhilarating. As long as the rope doesn't break, of course, but that never happens, right?
Oh.
Yes, Hellgate.
What language would you recommend that we learn?
What would you recommend that they learn? Yeah.
Now that's a good question. That's a very excellent question. I studied French. French was very popular. Spanish is very popular now. Spanish is a language now of necessity, given our neighbors to the south and the fact that we have so much contact with the south. Spanish is important. But think ahead. Think ahead. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you're out of college, you're interested in international affairs. What language do you think you should study? One obvious answer would be Chinese. Now, I had a student at Montana. Actually, she was an intern with the World Affairs Council. She actually was an intern in China during her high school years. She's now on her way to speaking Chinese with a very high degree of fluency. So she'll always be able to find a job. Another part of the world that is very important is the Middle East. So speaking Arabic would be very, very important. These are hard languages, but they're not impossible. You know, if you apply yourself, you can learn them. And the earlier you start, the better. So I would say Spanish is almost a necessity. Even in Montana, we hear more and more Spanish being spoken. But to deal with the global world as we think it will exist, I would recommend Chinese or Arabic. Okay, so good luck. Yeah. Yes, back in the green shirt again. Ellie Hansen, I think that's the...
My name is Jacob, and my other question I have is, you've earned, I've read on paper that you've earned an award for helping out the hostage situation.
Yes.
How many awards have you won over time in your whole entire career of working, being an ambassador?
That's a good question. I would say off the top of my head, 7 or 8. Sometimes they give you little medals. You know, the military has medals. I'm very jealous. They have very nice medals. The State Department doesn't do very much with medals. I have a couple, but I'm pleased to have gotten the awards I have gotten. It means people have recognized your work, and I'm very proud of them. Very glad I could do something to achieve that, to earn them, to merit them.
Excellent. We have time for about 2 more questions, maybe one from each location.
Okay, one from each. So Alaska, is there a question?
I see a hand there in Sealy right off the bat.
Sealy,
So
okay, go for it. Whoever I see
Yeah,
a hand.
I see
but
the
don't
hand.
an arm. Is there an arm and a body there in a blue? It looks like, hi.
Hi.
Sorry.
I was going to ask, what was the scariest or place you've been to, to visit for your job, or what was the scariest place?
Scariest?
Yeah, the scariest maybe event or place that you were.
Well, that's in 1979. There was a revolution in Iran. Major change, dramatic change. The country was in chaos, and I was there in the streets of the capital of Iran, a city called Tehran. Every night there was gunfire, and so one of the things I learned how to do, I don't do this at home, but you'd hear gunfire at night, 2 or 3 in the morning. I learned how to roll off my bed very quickly and get under the bed or up against the wall so I would be safe. I remember at one point, the scariest moment would have been, I was coming from town and I was attempting to get back to the embassy in Tehran, and there were armed guards everywhere. And suddenly I came around a corner, right? and there was a guard with a rifle. Now, the guard was not very old, and I don't know who's more scared, me or the guard. But the guard had that rifle pointed in my belly button. That makes you take notice. Fortunately, it passed almost instantly. Nothing happened, and put his rifle down, and I knew a few words of Farsi, so I was able to calm the situation. But those things happen. Those things happen.
Oh, it looks like Sealy Lake has to go. Goodbye, Sealy Lake.
Bye-bye, Sealy Lake.
Thank
Good luck to
you.
you. Stay in touch with us. We'd love to help. Bye, guys. Good questions.
Excellent. And Alaska, how about one more question from you?
I'm Alexander, and since you know a lot of spoken languages, do you know any written languages? And if so, what was the hardest to learn? Thank you.
The written languages.
Oh, that's a good, excellent question. When I study a language, I really focus on speaking. I think any language that is not written in, say, Roman letters, English, French, Italian, German, and so forth. Chinese would be extremely hard to read. Chinese is hard to speak as well because you have different tones. So the tone of the word changes its meaning entirely. Arabic with its writing looks kind of weird, a bunch of squiggles. But once you learn it, there's a grammar and a logic, so you can read it. With Chinese, you have to memorize hundreds and hundreds and even thousands of characters. So, and Americans have done that. Students have done that. Scholars have done that. I've known even diplomats who know Chinese extremely well, can speak and can read it. So, it's not impossible. It takes a lot of effort, though. I won't kid you. So.
Goodness. Well.
Okay. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for coming by. Good luck to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Alaska. And
yeah.
Ambassador Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.